Good afternoon, global citizens trapped in the geopolitical blender. This is Mr. Radio broadcasting from the epicenter of international bewilderment, where world leaders play chess with checkers pieces and call it strategy. Today's menu features a delicious spread of tariff tantrums, economic gymnastics, and diplomatic contortions that would make a circus performer weep with envy. Our main course? A certain former, and potentially future, president who treats international trade like a reality TV show, complete with dramatic eliminations and surprise twists. But hold on to your economic indicators, folks, because we're serving this with a side of India's masterclass in diplomatic tightrope walking and a garnish of BRICs trying to reinvent the global economic order while most of the world watches through their fingers. Trump's tariff theater, the art of economic warfare. Let's begin with the star of our show, Donald Trump, the man who's turned international trade into a contact sport. In a move that surprised absolutely no one who's been paying attention since 2025, Trump has decided that a 50% tariff on Indian goods is exactly what America needs. Because nothing says make America great again like making everything more expensive for American consumers, right? The logic, if we can call it that, goes something like this: India buys Russian oil, Russia uses that money to fund its Ukraine adventure, therefore India is basically financing Putin's military escapades. It's guilt by association economics, like blaming the grocery store for your bad dietary choices because they sold you the ice cream. Here's where it gets deliciously absurd. While Trump is slapping India with the economic equivalent of a hockey puck to the face, China, the country he spent his entire first presidency demonizing, gets a comparatively gentle 30% tariff. India's punishment for buying Russian oil is harsher than China's punishment for being, well, China. That's like giving a parking ticket to someone for speeding while letting the bank robber off with a warning. The cherry on this diplomatic disaster sundae? Trump recently admitted these tariffs were not easy to do and caused a rift. Congratulations, Mr. President, you've discovered that international relations have consequences. Who could have predicted that treating allies like enemies might strain relationships? India's economic resilience, the GDP growth machine. While Trump plays tariff roulette with America's trading partners, India continues to demonstrate what actual economic leadership looks like. With GDP growth of 6.5% in 2024-25, the highest among major economies, India isn't just weathering global storms, it's building bigger umbrellas. This growth story is particularly impressive when you consider the headwinds. Despite inflation concerns and global uncertainty, India managed to maintain momentum through strong domestic demand, robust private consumption, and strategic infrastructure investment. The Reserve Bank of India projects continued growth of 6.4 to 6.7% through 2025-26, which in today's economic climate is roughly equivalent to discovering oil in your backyard. But here's what makes India's performance genuinely remarkable: they're achieving this while being economically mugged by their supposed strategic partner. When your largest trading partner decides to impose punitive tariffs that could wipe out $55 billion worth of exports, and you still manage to grow at nearly 7%, you're either incredibly resilient or incredibly lucky. In India's case, it appears to be the former. The secret sauce? Diversification. While other economies have put all their eggs in one geopolitical basket, India has been quietly building multiple revenue streams. Their services exports remain robust, their domestic market is expanding, and they've been systematically reducing dependence on any single trading partner. It's an economic insurance policy in action. BRICs, the alternative world order's growing pains. Speaking of diversification, let's talk about BRICs, the international equivalent of a group project where everyone has different ideas about what they're supposed to accomplish. The recent expansion from 5 to 10 full members, plus 10 partner countries, has transformed BRICs from a diplomatic curiosity into what some optimists call a multipolar force. The numbers are certainly impressive. BRICs now represents 45% of the world's population and 37% of global GDP. That's more economic firepower than the G7, which must be causing some uncomfortable conversations in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. The recent addition of countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE, followed by Indonesia's full membership in 2025, signals that the global south is increasingly willing to bet on alternatives to Western-dominated institutions. But here's where BRICs reveals its fundamental challenge: it's less a unified bloc than a collection of countries with occasionally overlapping interests. China sees it as a tool for challenging American hegemony, Russia views it as proof they're not internationally isolated, and India treats it as an economic opportunity while carefully avoiding the anti-Western rhetoric. The 2024 Kazan summit was particularly revealing. Russia, desperate to show it isn't a pariah state, hosted over 30 delegations, including UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. The optics were undeniably successful for Putin, but the substance revealed the bloc's limitations. When your biggest achievements are creating a sanctions-proof payments system that doesn't exist yet and welcoming new members who can agree on basic principles, you might be optimizing for headlines rather than results. America's strategic anxieties, the fear of irrelevance. Meanwhile, back in Washington, there's a growing sense that America might be losing the great game of geopolitical influence, and the evidence is increasingly hard to ignore. The fear isn't just that China is rising or that Russia is acting out, it's that America's traditional partners are hedging their bets in ways that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Take the recent India-China rapprochement, hastened by Trump's own tariff policies. When your trade war strategy pushes your strategic partner into the arms of your strategic rival, you might want to reconsider your approach. The spectacle of Modi attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China, their first such meeting in 5 years, was a diplomatic earthquake that registered across every foreign policy think tank in Washington. The strategic nightmare for the United States is clear: losing India to China would represent the collapse of decades of patient diplomatic work. All those technology transfers, defense agreements, and Quad summits suddenly look rather pointless if India decides that economic pragmatism trumps strategic alignment. And who could blame them? When your supposed partner treats you worse than they treat your shared rival, the rational response is to reconsider the partnership. American policymakers are also grappling with the reality that their economic leverage isn't what it used to be. The dollar's dominance remains significant, but BRICs countries are increasingly serious about creating alternatives. When major economies start discussing trade in local currencies and building parallel financial systems, your monetary hegemony starts looking less permanent and more fragile. Global reactions: the world watches and waits. The international response to this geopolitical circus has been a masterclass in diplomatic hedging. European leaders continue their time-honored tradition of expressing concern while carefully avoiding taking sides. The EU's response to Trump's tariff wars has been to prepare countermeasures while hoping someone else solves the problem, a strategy that's worked remarkably well for decades of European foreign policy. Middle Eastern countries, particularly those newly admitted to BRICs, are watching with particular interest. The UAE and Iran finding themselves in the same economic bloc is the kind of diplomatic achievement that would have been impossible just a few years ago. That it's happening now suggests that traditional alliance structures are becoming increasingly fluid. African nations are also paying attention, with several countries either joining BRICs as partners or expressing interest in doing so. When Nigeria, Uganda, and others decide that a China-Russia-India-led economic bloc offers better opportunities than traditional Western partnerships, that's a signal that the global economic map is being redrawn. The most telling reactions, however, come from America's traditional allies. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia continue to publicly support U.S. leadership while quietly diversifying their economic partnerships. It's diplomatic insurance, maintaining security ties with Washington while ensuring they're not economically isolated if American leadership becomes too erratic to rely upon. India-US trade, the Great Rebalancing Act. The relationship between India and the United States perfectly encapsulates the broader challenges facing global trade relationships. With bilateral trade reaching $190 billion in 2024, the economic relationship is substantial. The ambitious goal of reaching $500 billion remains on paper, but Trump's tariff strategy seems designed to achieve the opposite result. The sectors hit hardest by the 50% tariffs tell their own story: textiles, gems and jewelry, footwear, and chemicals, precisely the labor-intensive industries where India has competitive advantages. It's economic warfare targeting India's strengths while claiming to support American workers. The logic seems to be that making Indian products unaffordable will somehow make American alternatives appear magically in the marketplace. The defense relationship remains one bright spot, with continued cooperation on fighter jets, drones, and missile systems. But even here, Trump's broader approach threatens to undermine decades of carefully constructed partnership. When you're simultaneously buying someone's military equipment and destroying their civilian export industries, you're sending mixed messages that would confuse a diplomat with a PhD in contradictions. Recent trade talks in New Delhi represent an attempt to salvage something from this mess. The fact that negotiators are meeting at all suggests both sides recognize the economic damage being inflicted. But it also highlights the fundamental challenge: how do you negotiate with a partner whose position changes based on social media sentiment and who views trade deficits as personal affronts rather than economic relationships? The historical context: when empires play economics. To understand the current moment, we need to step back and recognize that we're witnessing a fundamental shift in how global economic power is distributed and exercised. The post-World War II system, dominated by American institutions and Western economic models, is being challenged not through military confrontation but through economic alternatives. India's strategic autonomy approach, engaging with all major powers while aligning with none, represents a sophisticated response to this changing environment. It's neither the non-alignment of the Cold War era nor the wholesale acceptance of American leadership that characterized the 1990s and 2000s. Instead, it's a pragmatic recognition that multipolarity requires multiple partnerships. This approach has historical precedent. During the height of the British Empire, smart regional powers maintained relationships with both London and rising challengers. The difference today is that the rising challenger, China, and the established hegemon, United States, are locked in a competition that demands others choose sides, something India has thus far refused to do. The BRICs expansion should be understood in this context. It's not necessarily anti-Western, but it is post-Western, an attempt to create parallel institutions that reflect the interests and perspectives of countries that weren't present when the current global economic architecture was designed. Whether these institutions will prove effective remains to be seen, but their mere existence changes the calculus for countries evaluating their international options. Future scenarios, crystal ball economics. Looking ahead, several scenarios seem plausible, none of them particularly comforting for traditional Western economic dominance. The most likely outcome is continued fragmentation, not necessarily into competing blocs, but into multiple, overlapping economic networks where countries maintain different relationships for different purposes. India's future positioning will likely depend on how successfully it can maintain its current balancing act while building domestic economic strength. With projected growth rates significantly higher than most developed economies, India has time on its side. The question is whether external pressures, from trade wars, climate change, or regional conflicts, will force premature choices. For the United States, the challenge is whether American leadership can adapt to a multipolar economic reality without resorting to the kind of zero-sum thinking that treats every other country's success as an American failure. Trump's approach suggests this adaptation isn't happening, which creates opportunities for alternatives like BRICs to gain legitimacy and membership. The most intriguing possibility is that economic multipolarity might actually increase global stability by reducing the system's dependence on any single country's economic performance or political decisions. When multiple countries have significant economic influence, the failure of any one relationship becomes less catastrophic for the global system as a whole. This has been Mr. Radio with Global Radio Pulse, broadcasting the informed irrelevance you need to navigate our diplomatically challenged world. Conclusion: the sarcasm behind the statistics. As we wrap up today's tour through the halls of international economic absurdity, let's acknowledge what we're really witnessing: the painful birth of a new global economic order. Trump's tariff tantrums aren't just about trade deficits or Russian oil, they're the death throes of a system where American preferences could be imposed globally without serious alternatives existing. India's response: deepening ties with China while maintaining Western partnerships, expanding BRICS relationships while remaining in the Quad, isn't indecision. It's sophistication. In a multipolar world, the smartest strategy is to avoid putting all your economic eggs in any one geopolitical basket. The real comedy isn't that these changes are happening, it's that so many Western policymakers seem surprised by them. When you treat partners like subordinates and rivals like existential threats, you shouldn't be shocked when those partners start exploring other options. Basic economics suggests that monopolies eventually face competition, even in geopolitics. BRICS may not replace the Western-dominated global economy anytime soon, but it doesn't need to. It just needs to provide credible alternatives, which it increasingly does. The moment countries believe they have choices, the dynamics of international relations change fundamentally. So here we are, watching the great powers play economic chess while the world's fastest-growing major economy quietly builds relationships with everyone and commitments to no one. India's 6.5% growth rate isn't just a statistic, it's a statement. While others argue about who's winning the great power competition, India is busy actually growing its economy and expanding its options. The future belongs not to those who can impose their will globally, but to those who can adapt, diversify, and maintain flexibility in an increasingly complex world. On that measure, the score isn't even close. This is Mr. Radio signing off from Global Radio, where we report the news that matters and mock the news that doesn't, which, increasingly, seems to be most of it. Until next time, keep your portfolios diversified and your diplomatic options open. The world is changing whether we like it or not. The only question is whether we'll adapt intelligently or keep pretending it's still 1995. Based on current evidence, smart money is on the former, even if the politicians haven't figured it out yet.